Hi, this is Paula Gloria, and this show is called Farther Down the Rabbit Hole. The show is all about consciousness and how we create our reality. What's a very important part of our reality, many people in the world, throughout the world, in developed countries and in undeveloped countries, they live in cities. And so there's an interesting phenomenon of how the layout and the structure of the city affects our life. And in this country, in this city in particular, we are aware of a phenomenon called redlining. And that has to do with how people of power, in this case we'd be talking about bankers, can take maps and make circles around the maps, say using red pencils, and saying certain policy will be used within this area that's redlined, and another policy will be used in another area. What I want to try to show is how an ancient science can help us to understand what's going on. Now let me play a little bit more of this here.
At the very center of the park, General Motors had created...
Okay, this has to do with the layout that was done at the World's Fair in 1939. And this was a vision that progressive people had of how New York City would look once we availed ourselves of the automobile. And at first it's kind of clean and neat and orderly with all of these, clean highways. But there's a dark side to it, and that has to do with how the neighborhoods were chopped up in order to achieve this. What I'm going to propose to do today, it's a very ambitious topic, and I've been planning for weeks on how to approach this, is to explain what Tantra is. And most people think of Tantra as something that sort of is the answer to Christian Puritanism, and that Tantra has to do with sex. Well, Tantra does have to do with sex a bit, but it's certainly not entirely to do with sex. Mantra and Yantra equals Tantra. And mantra are sacred words that are said that produce a positive, beneficial effect on our physiology. We appreciate mantras through our ears. Yantras, on the other hand, are shapes and forms. And yantras are something that we appreciate through our eyes. What I'm going to try to propose today is an understanding of how yantra, or the shape that's appreciated through our eyes, has to do with the layout of cities. So I'm going to give you an idea of our conditioning. I'm going to show you, there's not very many yantras. There's thousands and thousands of mantras, but there's not very many yantras. And these symbols can cut across many different cultural viewpoints. Right now, for example, the yantra of this studio has been changed. When I came in, I noticed that they had this camera set in a higher position, so I thought, well, rather than have them change it to what I'm used to, let me just try something new, because maybe I can use it to illustrate what I'm trying to on this show. On this show, I'm trying to illustrate the influence that shape has on our psychology and our outlook, our creativity. And what I want to do is do some roll-ins of some shapes that are going to prove to us how conditioned we are. And I'm thinking of two shapes in particular, and I have these shapes in my apartment, and I meditate on them now and then, kind of thinking through things. One shape is the Sri Yantra, as it's known in India, two triangles, one pointed upwards and one downwards. And the Sri Yantra in India means the most important yantra. And that is known in this country as the Star of David, because that's how our culture looks on it, because of how we've had, our culture's made up of different religions, and the Jewish religion is associated with this yantra. Another yantra I'm going to show you is the Swastika. And we have huge reactions to this yantra. And I feel it's imperative that we gain command and understand this yantra better. So I'll have those as roll-ins later on. But anyway, getting back to this World's Fair situation, I want to show how we can perhaps use ancient science to address modern problems, because the problems of great power that the internal combustion engine unleashed means that we have to understand more than ever how to harness that power. And power is harnessed through consciousness, because it's the nature of our thoughts that's going to indicate what kind of activity we're going to have and what kind of creation we're going to make. So let's carry on with this.
An eerie blueprint for New York's destruction and its replacement by a different kind of world entirely. Gone were the crowded streets and neighborhoods, and to a large extent, the streets themselves. In their place, in an inner city eerily empty of human beings, rose tall towers, widely separated by broad swaths of green, and bisected by highways 14 lanes wide. Those highways carried people out of the city, and into an American landscape where people lived mostly in single-family houses, accessible only by car. A landscape built not around the needs of people, but around the needs of automobiles.
This is not a vague dream of a life that might be lived in the far future, but one that could be lived tomorrow morning, if we willed it so. The relation between these units of stone and steel, highway and green, is a symbol of the new life of tomorrow.
Okay, so here we are again, and what I want to say is in Berkeley in the 60s, everybody knows what that vision was like. The free speech movement was something that was sort of a conflict between the students. Mostly Mario Savio was the eloquent spokesman for that, but it was also known for Clark Kerr, who was the president of the university, and he always had to deal with the regents that he called the board of directors. And there was a big tension between, were students a product to be turned out? Because at the beginning of one show it was talking about how Clark Kerr was giving a speech where he said 29% of our gross national product is education. But the problem is when you put a monetary value on something like education, then that education is controlled by whoever controls the money. That's the problem. Okay, now I want to talk you through, here is a yantra. A friend of mine at the ashram was picturing a more expanded and elaborated version of the yantra here, and juxtaposing it on top of a picture of Lakshmi, which is the, I guess, anthropomorphization of prosperity. She's viewed as a goddess. And here I have my swastika. Let me pause it there. Now there's a lot of controversy about this figure, to say the least. And there's even controversy on which direction it's pointed. The direction of this yantra is, and this swastika, is pointed the opposite of how you see it with Adolf Hitler's regime. However, I do notice in all my travels in India and that it's in the other direction, that you'll see it in the temples in India. The Theosophical Society seems to indicate that this is the correct method. I've also seen it in some Wicca writings here, that this is the correct way to bring in positive energy. And this is also a symbol of the sun, and it's a symbol that the Native American Indians revere. Now, looking at it carefully, if you take off the feet, it's just a cross of equal lengths. And the feet can be considered the cross of transmutation and change. In other words, it's a cross that's on fire, it's a fiery cross, and it's spinning. And if you look at this, this means that the cross is spinning in a clockwise direction, because the fiery flames are going off to the left, so that indicates that the direction is clockwise. And this is usually considered an auspicious direction, to be going clockwise. So it made a lot of sense to me to contemplate a fiery cross of transmutation that's going in a clockwise direction. But like I say, you can see in different parts of the world or in India that the temples has it in the opposite direction. And so I'm going to talk you through again the yantras I've got here. And this is another one I have in my house. This again we know as the Star of David, and it's associated with Judaism in this part of the world. In India it's called the Shri Yantra, and Shri is a label of usually associated with Lakshmi or prosperity, being that prosperity is the kingpin of success, that you need to be assured of your food, shelter, to progress as a human being. Now, the triangles that are intersecting, one is pointed downward and one is pointed upward. Usually the upward one is the masculine energy going towards the sky, and the downward is the feminine energy going towards the earth. But you need both the inspiration of the sky and the groundedness of the earth. So they're both together. I've also seen it sometimes claimed that only the downward triangle is some kind of left-handed evil thing, but then haven't we as women had to face that kind of rap? So it's just, you need both. You need the up and the down to create something. It's not that one is better or worse. This is the Shri Yantra. Now what I think I'm going to do is take you through how I see this symbol in my neighborhood. Let me talk you through this. This is my neighborhood. It's a Gramercy Park area. And I think it was spring when I shot this.
Here we are.
And I was looking
for
motifs that were existing in my neighborhood to see if, I mean, this is like the epitome of the opposite of what the World's Fair was trying to show the ideal environment would be like in 1939 that I started it off with. Here's, you know, I mean, now we protect these kinds of buildings. If you want to make changes on it, you have to go to the Landmark Commission to make sure that nothing would be disturbed. This happens to be my window, and I didn't have my planters, my flowers growing out at the time. This is 19th Avenue, and some people say it's one of the prettiest streets of New York. I mean, I'm sure people have differences of opinions on that. But I was looking at how it is being renovated, and people are putting tremendous amounts of money into it, obviously, I guess, achieved through what they're getting. Oh yeah, here I am ready for a trip. And so I'm kind of grabbing these little shots as I go along. The equity that's gone up in buildings and real estate allows people to make loans and fix them up. And this is one that was done in a very attractive way. But take a look here closely at some of the tile work. I'm going to hone in on this pretty soon so you can see more accurately what I'm talking about, and then I'm going to pause it for you. You see, here's the symbol again of the swastika. It's embedded in what we see every single day. But if you were to highlight this in the wrong way, woe is you. But this is a motif. I'm sure that the architects and the designers, when they laid this out, probably researched carefully what was the nature of the history in the Gramercy Park area. Because undoubtedly this kind of renovation involves a lot of money and a lot of planning. I mean, this is like good taste. And here's another slightly different version of that yantra. I never saw this around India myself, but maybe we'd find it in Native American culture. And so again, you know, just to give a feeling of just how elegantly this place is done. You know, this is like with the best of taste. And this is recent, but I know there's other places around my neighborhood where you can see these similar themes. So I'm just trying to give a feeling of this environment in the Gramercy Park area right now in 2006. I'm doing, this is my camera, I'm reviewing some tapes. This is on my bed. And I'm going to be honing in on a previous tape that I did of my neighborhood. Now this is where Pete's Cafe is. I think this is where O. Henry actually wrote a lot of his plays in the Gramercy Park area. You would think that an artist like him would have gone to the Players Club, but he seems to have felt more comfortable in in the little Pete's Cafe. However, before it was Pete's Cafe, you can see here, it was, I don't know, maybe like a grocery store, and there you have the Sri Yantra, or the Star of David. Let me see if I can shuttle this back and make that more clear. Yeah, there we go. So that's in Gramercy Park. I'm not sure when that Star of David, as we know it here, came down, Sri Yantra as it would be known in India, but since this is not India, we call it the Star of David. But really it's a symbol it's a very simple two triangles on top of each other, and it goes back farther than even David. But today it's associated with Judaism. And now you don't see things like this put up a lot, I mean, unless it's specifically going to be a synagogue. What I'm proposing is that we need to understand these yantras, these symbols, because they do have a lot of power. And if you deny that they have a lot of power, how can you deny the strong reactions people have when they see them? And as a result of these strong reactions, we're not working together. I give some idea now of how, when you have things like public highways being built, it's very exciting that you're sort of cleaning up what looks to be trashy. And so there was a lot of hope that things are going to look nicer. But there needs to be a lot of wisdom when you lay out cities. Just in the same way, there needs to be wisdom when you lay out yantras and you're using yantras and mantras. Because Tantra means a process. And it's a process of how your willpower, how your focus can affect your reality. So it's your creation. This is a process of manifestation. And we, as a society, collectively, this is what we've manifested. And there's a lot of power to it. There's a guy who's got a job, you know. People have a lot of pride of their ability to create. Right now we're talking about taking away the railways. And LaGuardia was able to keep the subway system intact, which today has a huge amount of ecological benefit, because you're moving lots and lots of people around. Here we are building more highways, and you know, this gave people a lot of jobs, and that was important. And now it looks like the park system means the parkways, so a lot of money was able to be channeled in that direction. And there's a lot of beauty you create overall. Look at this. This is gorgeous. This is a beautiful yantra if you're talking about New York City as a yantra. The human body is a yantra. It's the supreme one. We've been created in the image of God, or our body is the temple of God. So we want a beautiful temple. We take vitamins and we exercise, and our city needs the same. These were the trashy railroad cars, and people were so happy to get rid of them and have the parkways come through. Here's the parkways. Everyone's going to get a car and go off to Jones Beach. And I think at this part of the narrative, this is Rick Burns, New York, talks about how $250 million was channeled to create these projects. And something to be proud of in many ways. Now the New Deal that was funneling all this money in also had a downside, and so now I want to get to the point of this, which is redlining. Here, after the excitement of Berkeley in the 60s and the tension between the students and the administration, one of the most important and progressive and exciting departments was the Department of City Planning. And also in the 60s there was this time of better living through chemistry, and that we could unfold our full potential through drugs. But then it became very apparent that drugs was very short-lived, and there wasn't a deep enough science of how the drugs, the long-lasting effect on the physiology seemed to be pretty early in the game realized it wasn't a serious approach. And this is the same way we should view construction in the city. We need to have wisdom, because take a look at what happened here.
Robert Moses built 255 new playgrounds in New York City. He built 2 in areas that black children could use. You know, white children were given sliding boards and swings and beautiful little wading pools in the playgrounds. Black children could still play with their broomsticks in the streets if they wanted to play baseball. Still had a splash through the fire hydrants. People know if a city cares for them or not. A playground is a lot more than a playground. A little vest pocket park is a lot more than a little bit of green. It's a sign that the city cares, that it's willing to devote something to your neighborhood. What did the mothers of Harlem think of the policies of the state when there was no place for their children to play?
Even more insidious for the city's black population in the end were the federal mortgage and loan programs promulgated by the New Deal, which, to revive the moribund housing market in the outer boroughs, set in motion a fateful process that in the next 2 decades would systematically segregate neighborhood after neighborhood in New York by race.
African-American ghettoization really begins in the 3rd decade of the 20th century. It begins in the 1930s. It begins with New Deal policy. It begins with the federal government and the state government colluding with banks and insurance companies to solve New Deal problems by building.
Okay, now take a look at this. This building, even though you're rich and you can move out of the ugly city, you know, where the infrastructure's falling apart, water isn't coming correctly, or you know, electricity's bum, whatever the problems were in the city, you headed out towards you know, fresh land. But look at how it's being built, these little boxes. What kind of creativity could come out if a yantra is a shape that's supposed to invite in certain energies, certain divine, beautiful energies, because we're talking about divine tantra. So we want divine mantras and divine yantras. What kind of creativity, you know, comes out when we're living in these kinds of neighborhood? For all of the misunderstandings that New York City may have had between its different ethnic groups, there was always the promise that by honoring and understanding what your tradition was, as symbolized by your particular yantra, for Christians, the cross, for Jews, the Star of David, the neighborhoods repeat certain patterns. And we can see today, now we appreciate this, we understand, we have historical societies, but we want to go even beyond the historical societies. We want to create something where we're able to come together. So let's look what happens in Harlem.
We're building housing at the periphery of the city at an incredible pace. And in order to create a market for that housing, you've got to force white working class and middle class families to move. And in order to get them out there, what we do is actually make it irrational to stay inside the city. During the early years of the New Deal, the federal government established the Homeowners Loan Corporation. And the Homeowners Loan Corporation actually went out in Brooklyn and they began mapping out the borough into 66 neighborhoods, going block by block and finding every black, Latino, Irish, Jewish, Italian, Polish family that was there. And
so there you go. We're not working together when we don't know each other.
Ratings to each neighborhood based on the racial and ethnic makeup. Then they distributed the maps to banks and held banks to a certain standard when loaning money for homes and rental. The consequences of having your ratings go down is, of course, that your housing property goes down. So, for instance, white Brooklynites living in the old sections of North Brooklyn all of a sudden find out that their housing is less valuable, not because they've done anything and not because their neighborhood has changed, but because banks won't lend anyone money to move there unless those people are black. After the Homeowners Loan Corporation begins segregating on the federal level and working with local banks in Brooklyn, Manhattan, and the Bronx, and Queens, the state gets involved in redlining. They also map out Brooklyn. They go block by block, And this time they look for only black and Latino persons. And a single black person living on a block is enough to redline a block. The effect will be, in fact, to do extraordinary damage to black communities throughout New York. All of a sudden, black communities that had been scattered throughout New York City, which had long traditions in certain neighborhoods in the southern part of New York, throughout Brooklyn and Queens, and even on Staten Island, were being physically segregated, rooted up. When the Homeowners Loan Corporation finishes its work in the 1940s, it has dramatically altered the makeup of Brooklyn. In 1930, when the Depression starts, black Brooklynites are actually the least segregated group physically in the borough. By 1950, they're the most segregated group. The segregation is all in central Brooklyn in the Bedford-Stuyvesant district, and that will become the largest black ghetto in the United States by the end of the 1960s.
Movement here in the United States have to understand one very important thing. The basis for the Israeli operations against Hamas in the occupied territories, the basis for the Israeli attacks on Lebanon and the tremendous humanitarian atrocities that are going on there, the basis for the U.S. support of this, the basis for the war in Iraq, the basis for the coming attack on Syria and Iran, all boils down to one thing. The 9/11 myth, the racist warmongering myth, spread without proof by the Bush administration that somehow Arabs and Muslims carried out 9/11. The truth, of course, is that the 9/11 attacks were a war provocation coming from the bowels of the CIA, the Pentagon, the NSA, the NSC, and so forth. So the peace movement has got to take up the cause of 9/11 truth. Otherwise, these wars will go on for the foreseeable future. The only way to get peace is through a strong policy of 9/11 truth.